tuning in. Today we have with us Dr. Christy Wynn Molen, who has her PhD in Communication Sciences and Disorders from LSU. During her career, she has served as Director of Clinical Education and Assistant Professor. She is currently an adjunct instructor at LSU. We also have with us this afternoon Dr. Claire Norris, who is currently Associate Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Effectiveness for the University of Louisiana System Office. She has worked in the UL System Office as Assistant Commissioner for Academic Affairs previously, and has also served as a faculty member in a sociology department at Xavier University. Our third panelist today is Joy Banner. Joy is, Dr. Banner is the Director of Media and Marketing at the Whitney Plantation. She is a native resident of Louisiana, Wallace, Louisiana, and a descendant of the Whitney Plantation. Dr. Banner has taught business and marketing and has served as a business and marketing professor in Austin, Texas. Thank all of you, ladies, for agreeing to be on the panel and to share your experiences in living through a let's just say a tough situation when we are facing a catastrophe of sorts. And I think all of you had the same experience in terms of dealing with the results of Katrina and how you managed your doctoral completion, your sanity during that time. And since we are in a similar, different catastrophe, but it is a situation that has impacted or is impacting scholars' ability to get through their program. And obviously, all three of you successfully navigated those barriers. And we're looking forward to getting your thoughts and ideas about and sharing with our group today about how you did that and what you felt was important and most helpful to you as you navigated that. All right, so Claire, let me direct the first question to you, and obviously all of you can chime in as you see fit to further expand on the question. All right, so the first question, would you share a little bit with the audience today with your experience in navigating a natural disaster and while you were completing your PhD in terms of how did the event itself impact your ability to get through?
Unmute there. So sure, and thank you, Dr. Abraham, Veronica, and Hannah for having me. I'm excited to give back to SREB in this way. So, you know, I guess I should start by saying that when Katrina hit, I was a new mother. My husband at the time, and still is, a police officer. And so he was pulled to work 12-hour shifts, night shifts. And I had a 10-month-old at home, and Katrina hit, and the city of Baton Rouge was a little chaotic in terms of, you know, adjusting to kind of an increased population, but also trying to be good neighbors to the folks who had actually been directly hit by the storm. I was about 60 miles at the time from New Orleans, and I was in the sociology program. And so taking all of those things together, it was really a lot. the first thing I did was call family, and I left Baton Rouge for a while my husband worked with my child. I contacted my advisor and I said, hey, I'm going to be working remotely for a while. And in those times, it really wasn't that easy. We didn't have Zoom, so it was phone conversations and cell phone bills, but she understood. And so I went to my mom's for about a month until my husband's his workload decreased and he could help out. But it gave me the space to do, to continue on in terms of work. I suspect that while Katrina was very different than what we're experiencing now, there are some similarities in terms of remote work, maybe even being displaced a little, as well as some of you are probably parents. And so that is a lot to take in all at once with, folks being in the home while you're trying to work and so on. So that was my situation. And in many ways, there are quite a bit of similarities. And so that's kind of my experience.
Good, thank you. Dr. Banner, anything to add to that?
Yes, and again, thank you all for having me as part of this program. And yeah, Dr. Norris brought up a lot of, a lot of similar feelings that I went through as well. It was, I almost didn't want to participate today, not because I don't respect the program or respect this topic, but because I didn't have major storm damage, and my family home didn't get destroyed. And, I wasn't in any danger. And my parents made sure that I evacuated with them to Houston, and all of us left. And my family home and neighborhood is located about an hour out of New Orleans. And we had people from New Orleans that evacuated with us. We had family members who at the last minute decided to leave, and thank God they did, or else they would have not survived it. And yeah, Baton Rouge we didn't get any major damage. We just had an influx of people. Traffic was horrible and terrible. And I know that sounds like something very superficial, and it is very superficial in regard to what was going on. But when you're trying to navigate between, where you're living and getting to class on time, and your normal route takes you 15 minutes and now it takes 2 hours, and you're stressed with all of that, it's something that you have to also account for. But the reason why I didn't want to participate is because as soon as I started thinking about the topic and how it wasn't justifiable for me to participate in the discussion, all of the guilt came back, and there is such a thing as survivor's guilt. Nothing compared to what people who lost everything went through, but it was still very emotionally draining. We were surrounded by trauma. The whole time we're surrounded by it. You go to the store and there's literally people are trying to put back the remnants of their life. So they're having to buy everything, right? And so you're just seeing all of this pain and trauma around you. Where I live at, where I grew up, that was the last stop before people were allowed into the city. And so we had folks that were literally around gas stations, didn't have any provision. So they just left, they were trying to get back in, and all they could do is get as close to home as they could. And so it was a mass of people, so, at convenience stores and grocery stores, just sitting there waiting. So it just made me feel like I couldn't do enough. I tried, I felt I was donating. LSU had a triage center set up at the Pete Maravich Assembly Center. And I helped out there, but then that was, emotionally draining as well. So it just felt like there was nothing, I couldn't do enough. I felt very, very, sorry, felt very guilty for it. So I guess we never have we have strategies. Hopefully we have strategies for preparing for major events, but we don't have strategies of how to be supportive of people that are really in the midst of it. So like with the pandemic, maybe or maybe not, the pandemic has affected you financially, or maybe you're one of those people that are lucky and it's not hitting you as hard. Or maybe emotionally you're doing a little bit better from it, right? But now you're still trying to figure out, how do I help people? And so I think that being conscious and cognizant of not overextending yourself, of having a strategy of how you're going to help someone is also important for you as you're navigating your time and your resources so that you will complete your degree.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nguyen, Dr. Molan, excuse me.
Either is fine.
You answered it either, right? There you go.
Yes.
But yes, any additional thoughts?
Yes. So when Katrina hit, I was very fresh in my program. Literally, it was a week after I started my program. So I am born and raised in Baton Rouge, so I'm about 80 miles away from New Orleans. And I, like Dr. Banner, felt very similar in I wasn't sure if I was qualified to participate in this panel just because, again, I didn't have any direct damage. My home wasn't flooded or destroyed or anything like that. But then as I started to kind of talk to others, I realized that I was impacted in certain ways. And so, and talking about the influx of people that came in. So one of the things that happened with us, our department opened up to the speech language pathology, or the COMD department for LSU Health Science Center. And so when we did return to school, it is not only our department from Baton Rouge, but now we have a whole additional department that's participating with us. So now we have double the professors and more students, and we're having to navigate classroom space and office space within a very confined area. And so that was one of the biggest things that happened for us, was just trying to navigate space compared to the way it was literally a week before. And so myself, I also I'm a practicing speech language pathologist. So I was trying to figure out how could I help? What could I do to help all those people who are impacted around me? And so I remember running around town, just trying to offer my services to volunteer in some type of way. And that proved to be a challenge. But what happened was a door opened up to me at church. And so a number of people actually evacuated to our church. And we didn't have very large facilities, but we did have a nursery. And so we had families living in that nursery. And then we opened up a shelter there. And so I can remember my mom and I, when I wasn't in class, going to volunteer weekly at that shelter, getting to know people. And then I had a family member who moved into my neighborhood, and they lost everything. And so, we were constantly trying to bring things for them to help them out, to help them, get settled, just because, we felt very fortunate that, things were still in place with us, but there were so many people around us experiencing so much loss that we just had to figure out some kind of way, to be of assistance.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for weighing in on that. So, Dr. Banner, let me direct this question to you. What advice or resources did you find most helpful during that time? What advice or resources did you find most helpful during that time, and especially in terms of getting you through your graduate studies? Because Dr. Mullen, you were just pointing out, whether you were directly impacted or not, the impact was in some way, shape, or form, it had some effect on all of you. Whether it was direct damage or the influx of people, the changing of your department, those dynamics all of a sudden change. I mean, things change around you, and I think we're all experiencing that in the current environment. Whether we got COVID ourselves, I suspect that probably most of us know somebody, friends or family, who've been affected in some way, shape, or form. Although thankfully most of us have not had it, but we know someone who has. And and if you're really unfortunate, somebody may have passed away as a result of it as well. So could you all weigh in terms of what advice or resources that you found most helpful during that time?
Well, I think for me, being at that time, I was in the first semester of my second year. And actually, and I know that this is different for you all because your normalcy, your school, your scheduling has, I think, been impacted by this. I don't know how you feel in terms of your schedule now versus the way it was before. But my coursework, I was, in coursework at the time, and being around the fellow students was definitely being part of my having community with the other students was definitely a way that helped me get through it emotionally. So I know you all might not be able to meet physically with your friends, but Zoom doesn't have to be just for business. I know like we're using it all the time, so we don't want to voluntarily use Zoom. But I think that it's very important for you to have as much community with people as possible. And yeah, I mean, and if you used to grab a glass of wine or grab a beer with your friends, like you can still do it with Zoom. You can still have your wine, you can still have your beer, and have your conversation. Because I think it's very important. Another to me was definitely my family. I had someone who had evacuated and lived with me in Baton Rouge at the time, and it helped as much. I loved having him. I loved being able to know that I was helping someone out and a family member, but then also having him with me it took away the loneliness and that emotional support that I needed. I didn't realize it at the time that, it was so nice to have family. I mean, when I could get back, again, my family was based in about an hour away. My hometown is an hour away between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And so they didn't have any electricity. They didn't experience storm damage. But I wanted to go to my family as much as possible. So I was even willing to suffer the Louisiana heat to be based around my family and family from New Orleans that had evacuated. And of course, I wanted to be there to support them, but it was a support system for me. So yeah, just your family, your friends, keep in communication with your professors, your advisors, your organizations that you are associated with. Yeah, just keep those lines of communication open.
Thank you. Any Dr. Norris, Dr. Mullen, any advice you got or resources that you found most helpful during that time yourselves?
Well, I would just say during that time, we didn't have like the social media groups at that time that we have now. So a lot of my communication with my cohort was either via phone or via email. And it was three of us that started our program at that same time. And so they were both from out of state. And so when they heard that a hurricane was coming, because, they had never experienced it, they immediately evacuated back home. And so, or they returned home. And so we were separated for a period of time. And so we tried to still maintain that communication, as much as we could until we could all be back in Baton Rouge and back on campus. And so, I feel like now, because of social media, we have like maybe professional groups on like Facebook or Instagram. And so a lot of times we can kind of share our experiences with people from all over. And so my suggestion is to just take advantage of those opportunities so that you have someone that you can talk to, because like Joy, I did often rely on family, but sometimes because they weren't in a program and they had never gone through a program, they didn't necessarily understand the stress of being in a program, but they could obviously offer support in other ways. And so you want to make sure that you have multiple support systems going.
Good. Thank you. Dr. Norris, any additional?
Sure. I mean, I could just basically echo the social support, that social support is key to your success. I think SREB shows you that constantly by creating these cohorts. And so if you can kind of mimic that social support that you receive from SREB at your institution or in your state, you're winning. I'll share this with you. So again, I was a new mother, and one of the things I sort of learned to do was embrace the new norm. And so the new norm meant that I had a child, my husband worked crazy hours. And so I had a woman who now is my best friend. She agreed to write with me. She became my writing buddy. And we held each other accountable. I mean, we were hard on each other. And I was in my thesis hours working on my thesis at the time. And so we would meet up, and I know you guys can't do that, but we would literally get together at crazy hours anytime we could to write. And so that's how I got through my thesis. And then it worked so well. I did the same thing for my dissertation, even though things were kind of back to normal by then. We would get together when no one could bug us and write. And we'd pass our kind of manuscript back and forth. We tear each other's manuscript up. And she became kind of like, you know, you have gym buddies. She became my writing buddy. And till this day, we do that. We hold each other accountable professionally. We're kind of hard on each other, but we know it comes from a place of love and care. And so if you can find that person who's sort of equally motivated as you are, and start writing with them, kind of holding each other accountable, that's something that really helped me. That would be sort of the advice that I'd have.
Good. I appreciate that, because that's good advice under any circumstances to develop that kind of a relationship with someone to help you as you go through even your graduate studies, even professionally, accountable, and have that accountability. That is great. Dr. Norris, while I'm with you, so at that time, how were you communicating with your advisors or mentors or committee folk? As Dr. Mullen pointed out, well, we didn't have Zoom and we didn't have all those technologies back during Katrina's time. We had cell phones, but after a major physical catastrophe like that, you don't have cell towers and you don't have easy communications. So how did you establish communications with your advisors, your committee members, your mentors?
So since communications, I guess, has changed so much since I was in graduate school, I'll actually focus on our strategy more than the actual,
Okay.
channel of communication.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So I harassed my advisor. I didn't let her off the hook, and we are good friends today, so I can say that. But, we had regular scheduled meetings. Advisors have other jobs, so they get busy, and you just kind of become the fire that's not the closest at the time. And so I demanded, if you will, that we met weekly. And even if I felt like I was submitting something that was terrible, I submitted it. And so, even if it was just a paragraph, and it was just something to say, I'm working, I'm doing it. And you'd be surprised how, months of doing that, you have a manuscript, a dissertation, or you're prepared for your comps. So we had consistent meetings where I was always on the hook for a to-do list of some sort. And so she would expect something. And it's funny because to this day, my husband says, do you remember you'd always submit stuff and everything would have like red ink all over it? And yes, I do. But that was our thing. And I think the best thing is to be consistent and make sure they expect you to be on their calendar every week.
Okay. Dr. Banner?
Because I was in the coursework portion of my program, I really think that it was an email that was sent out. It was more email and I don't think too much phone communication that was sent out and asking us to check in either with the chair of the department, letting us know everyone was okay. But it was that point of time that was it was so many things going on. And I admire Dr. Norris so much for realizing that structure is so key, not only into getting your goal accomplished and to getting finished, but to give yourself a sense of structure and some normalcy in it. So I think that's very, very wise, very sage advice. and going back to creating that new normal. Yeah, how do you create the new normal? And it's by that structure, by a new plan, yeah, and just again checking in regularly as much as you can. But yeah, for me it was mostly through email.
Good. Thank you. Dr. Moreland?
Mine was the same. It was mostly through email at that point because, again, I was very new into my program. I think with my mentor professor, however, we did communicate through phone conversations quite regularly because I had also obtained my master's from that program. And so she always wanted us to have a project going. And so when I started, I had a project that she wanted me to kind of take further that I initially started in my master's program. So just to kind of take it in a new direction. So I did have to check in on that project and make sure that I kept that going as part of, starting this new academic program.
Thank you. Dr. Banner, so what advice would you provide, would you offer to current scholars about how to advocate for themselves at this kind of time? When all these things are going on and life's harder. What kind of advice would you give the current scholars about how to advocate for themselves? I think you all have kind of touched on this a little bit as we've had this discussion, but any additional thoughts of what advice you would give these current scholars about how to advocate for yourself in this different kind of environment?
Well, I would definitely, hopefully you all are in programs where you do feel a sense of community with your fellow students, but even if those relationships are not as close, and sometimes you're going to have people that you're close with, some not so much. I was very fortunate. I'm a graduate of the Communication Studies department at LSU, and we had a very collegial department for the most part. But even if that's missing in your department, there's still it's still importance in you communicating with each other, as a community. And you all touching base, because I guarantee you that some of the issues that you're having, some of the pressures that you're facing, some of the challenges, it's being felt across the department. There's always strength in numbers. So have communication with them, and not to be contentious or not to be there to promote conflict, but having communication outside of your professors, having a way to talk amongst each other. And then there are going to be more senior people in that department that maybe has a closer relationship with the chair, right? So you can negotiate and navigate who would be the best person to bring your concerns to, the appropriate person. But I think, again, figure out that system. I wouldn't recommend, if you are not comfortable, if you're new to a program, be careful, be strategic in the way that you communicate. And again, I wouldn't, and if you have a great relationship with the professor that you feel like I can communicate to this person and you trust that professor, I think that, yeah, being able to communicate with them and having that trust element. But if you don't have that trust, then I would say gather people around you, have a discussion, and then build on your strategy from there.
Thank you. Dr. Moreland, what advice would you give the current scholars about how they communicate with or advocate for themselves during this time of crisis?
I would say just make sure that your presence is known. Sometimes in this situation where we are divided or we are separated in the sense that we're not maybe physically meeting together, you can get lost in the shuffle. And so kind of like Dr. Norris said, you want to make sure that you are constantly in communication with your professors, with your committee, letting them know what's going on with you. Don't go and hide or feel like they're going to come to you, because it's not necessarily always their responsibility. So I would say make sure that you put forth the effort to, remind them, hey, I'm here. Hey, I have this going on. And so that kind of helps you keep yourself from getting lost in the shuffle. So that would be my bit of information.
Thank you. Dr. Norris, any thoughts on that of
Yeah,
how they can advocate for themselves?
yeah, I'm going to take a little bit more time on this one because I'm pretty passionate about this one. I think we'd all be remiss and sort of not pausing for a moment to acknowledge the social justice issues that are also happening along with COVID-19. And so this advocating for yourself is so important. So I'll start with health and mental health. You guys have to make sure that you are doing everything you feel is safe. So if you feel it's unsafe right now to physically meet with your cohort, it's okay to say that. Now, I think Christy's right. Presence is so important. And if you're not careful, you could get lost. But I think there are ways that you could go about that, but ensure that you still feel safe and you are protecting your family members. But additionally, one of the things we're seeing with the issues of social justice is that lack of resources, lack of access into spaces that some of our white counterparts have. And so to ensure that you are advocating for yourself, I'll back up for a moment. One of my good friends now, who was a professor at the time when I was at LSU, he called me up when all this stuff was happening. And he said, Claire, he said, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you experience racism at LSU? Did you experience, name calling? And I said, no, we wouldn't have stood for that. We had a cohort strong enough, we wouldn't have stood for that. But I will tell you this, if you take the Black students' outcomes, and we graduated, those who graduated, and those white students who also finished and graduated, our publications look different. Our conference presentations look different. Our access to the job market looked different. And I told him, I said, here's what I know. I know we started all the same. I know we came in with similar GREs. I know we came in with similar GPAs, but we ended up so different. And so I said, so while I don't think there was some type of structural racism, systemic racism sort of going on that no one acknowledged. And so I think that's part of advocating for yourself. And I think part of that is saying, hey, I need to publish. I'm not going to get on the job market unless I publish. I need conference presentations. I need you to put me on that publication. I will write. I will crunch the numbers. I will do focus group interviews. But it's important that you guys get out there and make sure that when you come out, you have the publications, the conference presentations of your counterparts, but do it in a way that you still feel healthy and you still feel safe. And so I'm sorry to get passionate about that one, but that one's important to me. And I bet Dr. Banner and Mullen would agree with me on that as they progress through their programs. And I will tell you guys, it's not, learning to advocate for yourself is important, not just for grad school, it's also super important for your professional career. And so that's my bit on that.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Norris. About, again, like at LSU, it was the same in my department. There's no specific, I had no issues with someone or anyone. I think the most controversial issue that came up during my time there, and I also did my undergrad at LSU too, and didn't have any issues. But I think the most controversial thing was at the time they were using that the Confederate flag was in purple and gold, and they stopped them from using that. And that was kind of that was the controversy. But when I think about, I was the only Black person in my department, that was in a doctoral program, the only student. I think 1 year, or for 1 year, there was an instructor, a Black woman instructor at LSU. But other than that, I was the only one. And I was going through feeling like the imposter syndrome, a lot of things that, Black students go through, even though I was connected with, the other students, the other white students. I learned how to drink beer. I was not a beer drinker before, but it was like, I'm going to learn how to drink a beer so I can be in community. But still, it was it's so important to understand, to connect, as the SREB was so valuable to me because I could see there were other professors of color, we were going through the same thing. So yeah, being aware of the structural racism, asking questions, so like being safe about it, but I think this is a great opportunity now. There's a saying, never waste a good crisis. So this is a good opportunity for you to go to your department and say, as a person of color, as a Black person, I am the voice that you need to be listening to. My voice will help you to stay away from the other traps and problems that you're having if they aren't recognizing that. So now is a great time. And even at LSU, I'm so proud of the Black Student Union there. They got on it, and they were like, we had Confederate generals' names almost on every damn building, pardon my language, at LSU. Those students got on it and said, not anymore. What are we going to do? Black Lives Matter. What is LSU going to do about it? And so they really, got a lot of change. So advocate for yourself and realize that now is a great time for you to do that advocating.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. And I appreciate the passion too with which you all are expressing this. This is great.
Nora started it.
So, Dr. Moreland, so would you address for me what advice you might have for other scholars on what can students do to help their institution or communities just to, and I think Dr. Norris used this term a minute ago, the new normal. It's a new normal. And what do you think, and what advice might you give to our scholars about what they can do to help their institution or their department adjust to this new normal? Any thoughts? And any of the rest of you can jump in on that one anytime you want.
Let's see, adjusting to the new normal. Well, I would say number one, just because we're all experiencing change, this is a great opportunity to kind of open your department up for change. Kind of jumping back on this social justice issue, just kind of thinking about like what things have you done in the past, maybe knowingly, maybe unknowingly, that you can do different moving forward. So I think that this time gives everybody an opportunity to kind of rethink things. We see now that we can approach a number of things differently than the way that we initially were doing them. We learned that most jobs, you can do them from home, or that people don't have to physically be in the same space to be able to maybe pull off a task. And so I think right now is a great time to just focus on, embracing change and how we can possibly make our situations better as a result of change, as opposed to just continuously doing the same thing and expecting different results. So that's one thing that I would say, just kind of looking for the best ways to make change for the better for everyone.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Dr. Norris, any thoughts on that?
I would just say be willing to engage in courageous conversations. Right now I agree, Dr. Banner said it best, don't let a good crisis go to waste, or maybe she stole that one, I'm not sure. Winston Churchill, yeah. But you're absolutely right. I think that engaging in some courageous conversations, I think sometimes we don't even know what we need. And so having a group and a network to say, did you get access to this? Do you have this? A lot of times, even as a professional, I don't know what I need to succeed. So ensuring that you've connected with a mentor is important, and make sure that mentor is on the path that you want to be, or, and making sure that you have a strong social support system to have those conversations, to bring about that change that Dr. Moreland brought up.
Right. Dr. Banner, any thoughts on that one?
I would just add that as you're navigating You know, I came into this thinking about the pandemic, and then now, like, I'm glad, because I'm so glad Dr. Norris brought it up. But right, I mean, the social justice and the movements that we're facing now. So as you're advocating for yourself, remember that it is not your responsibility to teach the world, right? So you are going to be you might be the only Black person, you might be a handful of people, and then people all of a sudden, you know, Black Lives Matter, and they turn to you like, okay, now tell me everything there is, you know, about being Black. And it's not your responsibility to teach people. However, in my role, that's something that I do. I signed up for. Again, I'm Director of Communications at Whitney Plantation, and our focus is on slavery, right? So I'm used to this conversation in a sense, but even with Black Lives Matter, the resurgence of it, there was a lot that I had to learn myself, you know, and it's based in anti-racism. And so to prepare myself to answer the questions and be engaged in more conversation, we had a book club that I led at Whitney, but it also exposed me to resources that I could offer to people, right? So if this is a conversation, if you want to approach it and advocate for yourself, hey, here's a book that you can read. Here's a podcast, you know, 15, 20 minute, do me a favor, listen to this person talk about, you know, racism, anti-racism, structural racism, systemic racism. So have those resources. And if anyone needs access to those resources, by all means, contact me. I'll be more than willing to share. I have all different levels. So I have from small children all the way up to the most resistant, right? And I meet with people. A separate group that I meet with is called Coming to the Table, and it's literally a conversation. It was started with Thomas Jefferson's descendants, Black and white, who got together and talked about race issues. So there's a lot of bumps and challenges that they navigated, but they created a model. So I am informed by some of their teachings. And so again, and I'm not perfect by any means. So the courageous conversation. If you think that you're going to sit down and have a conversation and it's going to be nice and you're going to say exactly the right things and they're going to say exactly the right things and everyone's going to walk out and it's all kumbaya, nope, that is not going to happen. So just as you're advocating, find the best way of advocating. How much do you want to advocate for yourself, the different issues, and also, yeah, just remember self-care in the midst of it.
Good, thank you. And my last question for all three of you, and any one of you can jump in on this one. So what's the most important piece of advice you would give the current scholars who are trying to navigate a public health crisis? You know, what's the one piece of advice that you might give this group of students who are, you know, their worlds have been, like all of ours, have been turned on in. What's one piece of advice that you all would give to this group of students?
I would say invest in yourself. Make sure that you've invested in your health. Make sure that you're investing in your career. Make sure that you are investing in the things that matter to you. Oftentimes, I know that we create these communities to take care of each other. And that's great, but just make sure that you're also taking care of yourself.
Thank you. Dr. Moreland?
I would say to just keep going because I know sometimes when you kind of get hit with something out of the blue, it kind of throws you off track. And so you have to keep encouraging yourself and knowing that if I'm working on this degree during this time in the middle of a pandemic, that I was designed to work on it during this time, because if you weren't, you would have completed it before this all started. And so now, because you're in this situation, that shouldn't stop anything about moving forward. So, just keep encouraging yourself, regardless to what's going on around me. I have a purpose and I'm going to stay on track.
Thank you, appreciate that. And Dr. Vanna, last word.
I would just add, y'all, be safe. Be safe. Don't waver on your practices. Use your sanitizer, wash your hands, use your mask. Going back to that example of like, I wanted to be in community with other people, so I started drinking beer. You might be in a situation where, that sounded terrible. But you know what I mean? But no, like, I mean, you might be like, for now, this pandemic is so politicized. Wearing a mask is so politicized. So depending on where you are and who you're with, it might not be a safe thing, socially safe thing for you to wear a mask, you know? But remember that is the key to keeping us safe, keeping our families safe. As communities of color, we're at more risk. So we're about to head into, you know, a more advanced, more cases of pandemics. I saw in Louisiana, our cases of death are up 27%. So y'all, it's no joke. So keep yourselves safe, like review your procedures. Go back to the beginning of the pandemic. I think revisit all the things that we're supposed to be doing, social distancing and all. If there's a party coming up, as much as you want to socialize, you know, remember that this is a life and death situation. So just go back to those safety procedures.
Thank all of you. Those are the questions that I had for you, and I know we want to leave quite enough time for those students who tuned in today to have a chance to ask you any questions that they might have, or to initiate some conversations on questions that they would like to have. But thank all three of you so much for your time and your efforts. And if I don't get to tell you before we get off the call, keep doing the good stuff all three of you are doing. We appreciate every bit of what you're doing and what you've gone on to do. Veronica, do we have a couple questions? Well, I see we have a few.
We do. The first question is, what is the greatest challenge COVID-19 has presented to you in your professional role, and what steps did you take to overcome them? Please share any momentary setbacks you may have experienced along the way to be successful.
I can start. So professionally, I work as a speech language pathologist in an outpatient hospital clinic. And then I also teach adjunct at Louisiana State University in the department. And so in my job as a speech language pathologist, there was a period of time where our caseload was significantly decreased because these are patients that are coming in voluntarily, so they're not in the hospital. And so for about a month, maybe a month and a half, I couldn't do that job. I was not able to work there. And then as far as my job as an instructor, you know, obviously we had to move from meeting in person to now meeting online. Prior to that day, I had always taught my classes in person, real time. So now I have to adjust to, you know, learning how to use Zoom, learning how to teach from Zoom, and then, you know, transferring this class, which was designed to be a real time in-person class, to something online. And so now this semester I have continue to teach remotely, and now I've even kind of spread out to teaching my class asynchronously. So now I've gotten into, you know, recording my lectures and, you know, posting them for the students. So it's kind of caused me to broaden my creativity as an instructor. And so now I realize that there are a lot of other ways to approach teaching the same information that's very different from me standing behind a podium and us all being in the same room.
I think
for me professionally, I'm sorry, Dr. Banner, go ahead. For me professionally speaking, I think that our greatest challenge at the system was addressing the digital divide. I can't say that I had really any personal challenges. It was pretty easy for me to pick up and work remotely. But our system, we have a number of students who don't have access to internet and so on. So we've been working to create policies and procedures and make sure funding is directed in the right sort of direction. So
I think for me, my job role changed a bit, as I'm sure everyone's kind of did in the face of all of this. Because I'm the director of communications, And then we had a lot that happened for the last year for Whitney. We transitioned to a nonprofit, board governed, and that was significant for us because before the founder of the museum part of Whitney Plantation was, and I'm using his words, he was a rich white man, right? And his intention was always to switch it over to a board so that he wasn't a white man owning a plantation. He never was comfortable with that. And it was important for us to communicate it because that's part of our fundraising now that he put up the money, donated the plantation to the nonprofit. And so raising money was the key, was the strategy in order for us to support the museum. Then when the pandemic happened, my role became less about fundraising and promoting the fact that we were a nonprofit, and it went into how do we keep engaged with our community and our audience. Especially during with Black Lives Matter, it was very important for us as an organization to take a stance. So I made a post that, mistakenly went viral. I guess was good for us, but at the same time, it took me more into the movement, which was good, which was great. But at the same time, having to adjust to the fact that I could not do it all. And we reduced the staff. And so taking a good look at what's the new normal, like what are your objectives, how those objectives have to change. Maybe you intended to take, more classes than you did, putting it back in your context. And it may mean that you have to reduce your class or you maybe not work as many hours. So just remember that as your job or your responsibilities may change, it's okay for you to look at your schedule, work, school-wise, relationship-wise, social-wise, and make adjustments for something that's going to work for the new normal.
Okay, and that kind of rolls us into our next question. Someone asked, do you have advice on being able to balance research, classwork, and self-care?
Well, I will admit that I'm still working on all of that currently at this point in my life. But I would say that, you guys are already in a place of professionalism. So it's non-negotiable. I mean, your work, your coursework, your research, this is your work right now. And so just like I have to go to work every day, you have to do it as well. I know our landscape has changed a little. And so you might have kids at home, you might have other family members at home working with you, but I would treat it like, this is a real job. And as far as self-care, again, I'm still working on this piece, but I will tell you, I know how important it is and how valuable it is. Sometimes I just don't do the right thing. I think for me, it's back to that structure of from 9 to 10, I will hit a gym, or, from 9 to 10, I will, meditate or whatever. And I think that the balance is just being unapologetic to others about things you have to get done to survive, really.
And
Let me just add, I'm sorry. I was going to say, just as being one of the oldest people on this call, I'm sure. I mean, it's a lifelong endeavor to try to balance it out. It just doesn't go away. Your work circumstances change, but the striving to try to reach that balance is and the dynamics change. Because you're in different places, you have different responsibilities. Those things are always at play, and it's always a struggle. I always thought I would get on top of it as well, and I'm still trying to figure out how to get my exercise in, how to eat the right things. I mean, it just doesn't go away.
Yeah, balance is overrated anyway, I honestly, understand, I think, taking a minute to kind of assess, do you work better in the morning? Are you going to sleep at night? Are you drinking enough water? Doing the things, the basic things in your life, assessing your personality. I'm a procrastinator. So as much as I want to say that, I'm going to start 3 months in advance, that ain't going to happen. So I think embrace your flaws and embrace the fact that you ain't going to ever get it balanced. That's never going to happen because life is not balanced. So don't stress yourself out about being unbalanced. Just appreciate the fun that comes with being imbalanced all the time.
I would only add to that you just strive to try to get there. You know, you just don't just
Yeah,
go
don't just
point
give
to
it
the
up.
wind, but you just keep trying. But knowing you never get there.
Right.
You know that, to your point, you just know you're not going to ever get there, but you keep trying anyway.
And I will add that one of our other SRB graduates recently wrote a piece for us on our blog about self-care, and I put a link in the chat, and that might also give you some other advice as well. Okay, and let's see. This is a pretty long question. With the current situation, it gets harder to maintain routine and structure, which is already hard enough with research PhD projects. And when a lot of us fall under less privileged demographics, women of color, there's always this voice of self-doubt in the back of your mind. Both under normal circumstances and under disasters. How did you all deal with this kind of self-doubt, if experienced, perhaps even imposter syndrome? Also, in your positions of authority, do you find it feasible to bring in administrative changes or even work culture changes to dismantle any piece of systemic racism or injustice in general?
Well, that was a loaded question.
Great question.
Very good.
I mean, I'm sorry if I'm talking so much, but I go back to remember it's not your responsibility to change an entire administration. And going back to what Dr. Abraham said about you can try, you know, and maybe there are things that you can try, but think about, you know, what are ways that I can do my part. But remember, I don't want anyone thinking that this is a problem that they're going to be able to solve right here, right now. So I admire, and it sounds like you're coming from a place, and as most of you are trying to make changes. But I think we're also putting additional pressure on ourselves to change other people. Remember, you know, we're not the ones who there's the issue with. And I think a lot of times we try to change ourselves, or we feel guilty for not being the one to go in there and change everybody. So just, you know, just be realistic about it and find ways that work for you and how you're going to communicate. I thought for me, one of the most advantageous things that I did, I got reconnected with my sorority when I went back to the graduate program. And that was another community of people, of Black women. And we were, I had a couple of sorors that were also in the PhD and master's program. One was a staff member at LSU. So I had this community of women who had gone through or were going through the same thing as me, and us being able to communicate, like, I do not feel like I'm worthy of this. And having my friend tell me, of course you are, you know, and we just got to remember that this is part of the system that we are in. So having a system of support, especially if they're in a graduate program and they're feeling the same way as you, helps you understand that you're not alone.
Yeah, I love that advice. And again, another thing that I think that most scholars will struggle with. I think there are going to be new adventures, whether it's, you know, your peer-reviewed publication, presenting at a conference, grant writing, I think launching a new program, seeking any form of funding. I think that we all deal with this. And I would say that, you know, let's see, gosh, 10 years out of graduate school, and I think I still have to kind of convince myself. I think if I had to advise you in any way, I would say you're probably going to always have these feelings that creep up of self-doubt, lack of motivation. You push on. Dr. Mullen said it best, keep going. So what if you don't feel like you're good enough? I mean, you kind of have to talk yourself out of that enough to get something down on paper and get it out. I think everyone on this call has experienced that and probably still deals with that when pushed up against a challenge. I think the winners from those who kind of just fail are those who just don't try and don't keep going. So.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, Dr. Mullen, were you getting ready to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, a bit of advice that actually my husband shared with me from someone on his committee was that if you have a seat at the table, just know you're supposed to be there. Because even now, having finished my PhD several years ago, I still sometimes struggle with looking around the room and trying to figure out, did they intend to invite me to this? Am I supposed to be here? Should I give my input on this? And, you know, I often have to encourage myself that, well, the invitation was extended. So for whatever reason, I need to be where I am. So take advantage of that opportunity. And so sometimes you really literally have to encourage yourself that you got the invitation. So go ahead and take advantage of it.
Very good.
Okay, and it looks like we have one last question, and you may have touched on this, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out. How do you negotiate workload, GRA obligations with coursework and managing the chaotic world around us? My advisor is my racial counterpart, and that's how it ends.
So Delton, I think we all as LSU graduates probably had maybe the same experience with, you know, an advisor that doesn't necessarily look like us. You know, I think though that relationship can be powerful if you have someone you trust. I think that, you know, you can kind of enlighten your advisor on, you know, your goals and what your kind of day-to-day experiences are like. And, you know, I think that your coursework is just non-negotiable. You've signed up to do it. You can do it. You've been accepted into the program. So now it's just a matter of you kind of just doing it. The feelings of fear and all that stuff, that's not going anywhere. But my advisor was really my advocate. I'd say make sure, regardless of their demographics, that they will advocate for you. She went to the table like I was her daughter, and she protected me, and she fussed at me like I was her daughter. And so I think that's more important than the demographic of your advisor. It just, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would echo that. My advisor was wonderful, you know, and she, I felt comfortable with her. I could trust her. That's the reason why I chose her as my advisor. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, yeah, I mean, just because someone is not in the same demographic as you doesn't mean that they don't have advice to give you. And in fact, you want somebody on the other side, right? Because you have your experience, and hopefully you have mentors that are in the same shoes that you, but then you have someone else on the other side that says, I know this is the way you think, I know this is how you want to do it, but let me tell you, from this side, this will be the better strategy. So that's another, yeah, you have people that are your allies and people who are not your allies, and it doesn't necessarily mean that people that aren't your allies are going to be the same color as you. So also it's all about your relationships and being open to advice. And even sometimes, you know, it's maybe even reaching out to one of those professors or one of the advisors that you don't necessarily have the best of relationships with. You know, if there's a way to, like, you know, hey, I had the situation happen, not intentionally, but I had a professor that I didn't necessarily meld with too much. And we ended up having a conversation about something separate. And it was like, wow, he's, you know, completely different from me. Our personalities are not necessarily the same. But he was able to give me a lot of good perspective and advice that I wasn't expecting. So be open and don't perceive people to be your enemy. Be cautious, but, you know, again, realize that you have allies and support, more allies and supporters than you think you do.
That's all of our questions, and it looks like we're near the end. So Dr. A.
Well, again, let me thank all of you so much for your time and effort put into this. We appreciate it. And go forth, do good things. Thank all of you who tuned in today for your time and for listening to and participating in this discussion. Be on the lookout because we're going to do more of these webinar help professional development sessions as we go forward. And if you've got ideas about topics you would like to know more about, get input on, hear somebody address, send us an email. We're looking for topics to address because this is something, given the environment, trying to make sure we can maintain communications and contact with all of you. We're trying to create some other avenues for us to interact on. And this is another method for us to do that. And at the end of the day, it helps us. And we get to share information, our knowledge and experiences. And that's what this community is all about. For you ladies, thank you very much again for your time and effort to be with us today. And I'm sure I will talk to all of you again very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.